Emotional intelligence is increasingly important in today's world. When you look at competencies required for key jobs in today's marketplace, you almost always see a requirement for emotional intelligence. This is especially true for leaders in all organizations. Various assessments of emotional intelligence have come into the marketplace in recent years, and they all end with the question, now that you have an assessment of your emotional intelligence, what should you do next? How can you improve your ability to manage your own emotions and to influence the emotions of others? A bit of history regarding emotional intelligence. In 1990, Peter Salovey, now president of Yale University, and Jack Mayer, University of New Hampshire psychology professor, published a journal article identifying emotional intelligence as a series of abilities. These included the ability to identify, use, understand, and manage emotions in yourself and in others. Dan Goleman in 1995 wrote a best-selling book which popularized emotional intelligence. After Dan's book, the idea of emotional intelligence caught fire, and people in schools, profit and nonprofit businesses, government, military, and all types of organizations generated a demand to know more and to find ways to improve the management of emotions in work and at home. In 1999, Peter and Jack and their colleague David Caruso, they asked me to publish their test and to help them find ways to make the knowledge of emotional abilities useful to people. I worked with them and co-authored the certification first for the multi-factor emotional intelligence scale, also known as the MEIS, M-E-I-S, and then later for the updated version of the assessment called the Mesquite, which stood for Mayer Salovey Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. More importantly, I identified an innovative way to help people use the knowledge and emotional intelligence to better their lives, to help them to be the best possible version of themselves at work and at home. This process is known as the Emotion Roadmap. I began to look at the Emotion Roadmap as a series of questions, a thought process that was designed to help people think through what was happening to them emotionally. Over time, as I work with them, I realized that in a lot of my interactions with leaders, high-level leaders, as well as middle managers, supervisors, and just anyone in general that I might be working with, I found that smart people often were stuck when they had emotions that were strong inside themselves, that were holding them back from making decisions, that were creating uncertainty, doubt. There was a lot of concern about what was happening internally, and if they were working with somebody else, sometimes they were very worried about what they might need or think they had to say or do in terms of how it was going to impact other people's emotions. These other people might be people that were loved ones. It could be something in the home, or it could be somebody at work, somebody that's really important to you, like somebody you report to, or a peer, or a senior vice president in another part of an organization that you might have to deal with, and you were worried about the emotional impact of what you were supposed to get done in terms of how it would be heard or experienced by the person you needed to talk to or deal with. So I began to realize that if you were stuck and emotions were somehow at the root cause perhaps of why you were stuck, that it impacted your ability to problem solve. Excellent critical thinkers got stuck when emotions were involved, I found. So I began to think about how Socrates might deal with this. I was always intrigued with the idea that Socrates helped people to uncover really interesting beliefs that were at the root of some of the things that they said or did. And he helped them to process through a series of questions where those beliefs came from and whether they were really founded on rational thought. Now, Socrates did it in a way that often made people upset, and I didn't want to do that. So I began to think, well, perhaps I don't want to do it exactly like Socrates did, but maybe I could combine some of the things I thought were important to deal with helping people solve complex, challenging problems, or maybe opportunities that they were challenged to get done by looking at just the focus on emotions. So I said to people, tell me your situation. Now, these are often clients. I ask them, tell me about your situation. And then let me ask you, how are you feeling about the situation right now? Is there anybody else involved, or is this something internal just to you? If it was more than them, I say, well, okay, if there's more people involved,
who actually is key? Who is key to what's involved? And once I identified a couple of people perhaps that were key as well as the person themselves, I'd ask them, okay, tell me how each of the key people also are feeling about the circumstance or situation, or what you're afraid that they might feel when you present what you need to present to them. So we'd get a current state. And then I had been trained over the years in change management or transformational change, and I had learned that you want to think about change as identifying the current state and then creating a compelling vision for a future state. Part of what helps change to work is having a real compelling and somewhat clear vision of what you want to change to. Having said that, when you think about what you want to change to, I ask them, what feelings do you want to change to? So if you're feeling something right now that's confounding you, causing you to feel doubtful or uncertain about how to proceed, and you're worried about the feelings with other people that you need to negotiate with or deal with, and you know, or at least you have a pretty good guess about what the others are feeling as well. I realize it's hypothetical, but you probably know somewhat about what you think they're feeling, and it's probably somewhat accurate. But you always want to realize that it may not be accurate. But still, you want to start with a hypothesis that you can test. So you identify how you're feeling and anyone who's key, how he or she or they is feeling. Then I ask, what would be ideal to feel? So it's current state and future state. What would be ideal to feel for you and for each of them? Might be different. May not be the same. You know that I like to talk about the idea that feelings, current feelings, are a good example of a current feeling that people can identify with is anxious. So if you're feeling anxious and you want to feel confident, how do you get there? Now, that's an example that most people can identify with, because I think there are many times in life that most of us, if not all of us, feel anxious and wish that we could feel confident. Now, lots of times the stakes aren't high and we just proceed and we hope for the best. But sometimes the stakes matter quite a bit. And it's very consequential what's going on. And so we really want to get this right. And so I ask people, if you're feeling anxious, this is an example of how this works, and you want to feel confident, how do you get there? And one of the things that I built into the model, into my roadmap, was this idea of appreciative inquiry. Now, appreciative inquiry is not something a lot of people know about, but it's this idea of recognizing and building on previous strengths. That's a part of it. And so I'll ask a person that I'm coaching or working with, trying to help, if you're feeling anxious and you want to feel confident and you're really, really worried about it because this is a really important event for you, let me see if I can help you by asking you this question. Do you remember any time in your life, in your past experience, recent or a long time ago, where you also felt very anxious, and it was, again, a very important, consequential circumstance that you were dealing with? Again, it might be very different than what you're facing today, but nevertheless, the feelings were similar, and it was very important to you also. And if somebody can remember a time in their life where they had been anxious and became confident and realized that at the time, because of the way I asked the question, they didn't know that they could become confident, but they actually were able to make it happen, something internally changes for them. Something changes in the way that they start to feel like, this may not be as impossible as I first thought. This actually might be doable, because if I look at my past, I was able to do this before. Not the same circumstance, the situation is very different, but the feelings were the same. Now, I will ask my next question based on appreciative inquiry. Is there any way that you could take what you did back then and make it useful for right now? Is that a possibility? Often it is. Now, what happens in that moment when I ask the question that way is people process it, and they begin to, instead of feeling helpless, feel a tiny bit hopeful. I ask them to tell me about the circumstance. And as we explore what they did in the past, I ask them to see, is there a takeaway here that you could use in this current situation? And I help them with that. But what's unique about the circumstances, instead of me as an expert telling them how to deal with anxiety and turn it into confidence because of all the things I've learned about how you do that, and I have lots of expert ways to tell people to do that, instead I'm working with them on building a plan based on their experience. In other words, it's their plan I'm helping them with. It's not my plan that I'm trying to get them to do. So that's where appreciative inquiry is part of the model. And then in understanding, I think one of the key things in understanding that is a built-in factor as well is what is it you're feeling and why are you feeling that way is about root cause and problem solving. So that's where the problem solving model kicks in. I sometimes refer to the emotion roadmap as emotion-based problem solving, because you use the problem solving methodology, which basically says, what's the root cause and how do I work with that root cause to change it? It often takes very different turns depending on what we're talking about. But if you look at a methodology for problem solving, basically you can just follow it and think about emotions that you want to change as a problem to be solved. And that's where I help people with that part. So we go from, if you want to turn from being anxious for yourself to feeling confident, and you understand the reason for your anxiety, it's perhaps because you're unprepared or you haven't... You don't know enough about the person you're going to be talking to if it involves somebody else and how they might react, or you've heard some things that concern you about the other person. So you start thinking and planning to, how do I learn more about the other person? How do I learn what they might like about what I'm going to say and what they might be challenged by? What's the best way I can involve them and tell them about it? Can I reach out to other people that might also be able to influence them before I ever have the conversation? For myself, are there some ways for me to prepare more? Is there a way for me to do some things that I haven't already done that make me feel less anxious, that are going to make me feel more confident? And we start to explore all kinds of options. And then in the management piece, I basically just simply ask people, of the strategies we come up with together, of those strategies, which one, if any, are you actually able to do? Do you really think you have the competency to do? And let's say there's more than one. There may be several. Okay, so you've got a couple or three strategies or only one that actually feels like you're really able to do it. So once you have a strategy that you feel like you are able to do, the second question is, are you willing? And now that might sound like a strange question because of course you're willing because you have a problem to solve and now you just figured out there's something you can do to solve it, right? Not always. It's really curious, but sometimes there are certain things that we are just unwilling to do, even if it solves a challenging problem for us. Once I recognize that, I might see if there's some ways to get you to be more willing, but it's not a good use of our time usually. Instead, I'll try and say, okay, is there another one that you actually are willing to do and you're also able to do? And if we've got one that actually you can answer, yes, I'm willing and yes, I'm able, we have an emotion-based plan. And you are feeling hopeful and you're really feeling thankful. And that's how the emotion roadmap works.